In this series of videos, I'm going to demonstrate how to use Queue and PriorityQueue in Java. Now, in this first video, I'm just going to do a bit of prep work. I'm not actually going to use a queue or a priority queue, but I'm going to do prep work so that in the second video where I talk about a queue, and the third where I talk about a priority queue, we'll be able to jump right in and just focus on those components. First, let's consider our business case. We already can create vehicles, and what we want to do is associate a buyer with a vehicle. So if you think of a lot of high-demand cars like electric vehicles and the like, sometimes you have to have a waiting list to buy the vehicle, especially with supply chain uncertainties that we're having at the time I'm recording this video. So there are a couple ways we can do it. One is just first in, first out. You're on the list, and boom, as soon as a car's available and you're next in line, it's yours. Another way we can do it is look at loyalty levels, similar to what you see with airlines and frequent flyer miles, where the diamonds get upgraded first, and then if there are seats left, then the platinums, and then if there are seats left, then the golds, and holy smokes, there are never seats left when it's down to silvers, but nonetheless, those are the two cases we're going to look at here. So the first case is, as a buyer, I want to be in a queue so I can purchase a vehicle. And then we elaborate that with some given when-then examples. Given a buyer named Steve has registered a request for a Sonic, when a Sonic becomes available and Steve is at the top of the queue to purchase the vehicle, then Steve will be associated to the Sonic. So that's the happy path case where Steve is first in line. But we need to consider other cases as well. Given a buyer named Steve has registered a request for a Sonic, when one Sonic becomes available and Steve is second in the queue to purchase a vehicle, then Steve will not be associated with the vehicle. Now, next requirement is simply prioritized by loyalty level, and I won't read these, but you get the idea of what's going on. So, several things that we need to do. We need to make a class that represents who this buyer is, maybe a first name, last name, driver's license number, or some kind of unique ID, and then eventually we'll want to add priority as well. Because we're going to need several buyers, I'm going to make a text file that has this buyer information in it, so I don't have to type it into like a graphical user interface every time, but instead I just have a file with the data in it. And then naturally I'm going to need something to read that file and create buyer objects out of that file. And then finally we'll need to adjust our GUI or our user interface so that when we create a vehicle, it finds the next qualified buyer and then associates that buyer with that vehicle, and then we can see that information right on the GUI. So that's the part we're going to do in this video. In the next video, we'll implement a queue, and in the following video, we'll implement a priority queue that deals with different loyalty levels. Let's go ahead and take a look. Good news is we have precedent for creating the data file and reading it. So you see there's inventory.txt, which represents reading in vehicles that can be read in from a file. I did this in a previous video. So you see we have something like a vehicle identification number, a model, number of miles, miles per gallon, gallons of gas, and then some kind of comment there. And then we have this inventory reader class that actually reads that file and creates vehicle objects out of it. So because I've covered this in a previous video, I'm just going to quickly create these and not get into a whole lot of detail, because if you'd like the detail, you're welcome to take a look at that earlier video. Nonetheless, let's do it. So this is a simple file full of buyers, and I probably will add more to this at one point so we can see a better demonstration of our queue. But nonetheless, you see first name, last name, driver's license number, and then some kind of loyalty level. So we'll save that, and now I'm going to make a data class or a DTO called buyer. So the buyer class is fairly straightforward and is a good representation of that file that I just created. We have first name, last name, driver's license number, and then priority. And then I generated getters and setters for each of those for proper encapsulation. So with that done now, let's make a buyer reader, and we'll model it after this inventory reader. It's fairly straightforward here. We're accessing this buyer's text file, which we have locally in this project, and naturally, normally we wouldn't keep data in our source code, but nonetheless, this makes for an easy example. We read one line at a time from the file. We split based on the comma, which is what we're using as a delimiter or a separator inside of this file. And then we pull out each element, first name, last name, driver's license number, priority, and we store those into local variables. Then we create a buyer object, and we associate first name, last name, driver's license number, and priority with that buyer object. Now in the inventory reader, I'm also adding the vehicles to a collection. Initially it was an array list, and then I changed it to a hash map. Hold that thought for now, because we know that we're going to implement a queue in the next video, so hold that thought until we get to that video. Let's continue by looking at our driver form, and let's consider what we can do here. So we have vehicle identification number, make, model, odometer, miles per gallon, gallons of gas, convertible description. I want to add one more row here for buyer, and when we start creating a vehicle, or maybe when we save the vehicle or something like that, I want to associate the buyer with this vehicle. The easiest thing might be to select the buyer when we pick from the drop down and then associate the buyer with the vehicle when we hit save, but that's okay. We'll figure that out in our next video. Let's go ahead and grab a label. Now, User Design 101, this buyer is going to be populated automatically based on who's in that list and who's next qualified for purchasing a vehicle. That's something the user can't change. Early in my career, if there was a field that would change but the user couldn't change it, I'd make it a text field and disable it. But that's bad user design, because if the user sees that metaphor of a text field and it's disabled, the user will try to figure out how to enable it. So what's better to do is just put an empty label in there and then populate the label with the user's name. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a label, and we're going to be programming this label. Well, in other words, we're going to be programmatically populating the label. So I want to make sure to give it a name that I'm going to remember. And finally, when we associate a buyer with a vehicle, we actually want to attach that buyer to that vehicle. So I'm going to update my vehicle class and add an attribute for buyer. And generate getter and setter. There we go. So I probably forgot a couple things, but you see this is what, about maybe almost 10 minutes worth of video, maybe a little bit more than that. By pulling this out now and doing this prep work, our next video, we can jump right in and look right at a queue. So I look forward to seeing you there. And as always, I look forward to reading your comments. Thank you.